Things have been moving pretty quickly in the last several days for Blizzard when it comes to the War Within, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at kind of the big pieces of news and do a review of all of the tank tier set bonuses. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's just start with the biggest piece of news. They have announced the date of the expansion being released. That's August 26th. So people who were guessing that the expansion would be released right at the end of August are feeling pretty good right now. Now, they have finally given some clarification. A lot of people had been wondered about like the beta access for upgrading to the Epic Edition. It says immediate beta access. Don't yell at me if that doesn't work right, but that is now what they have said. So there's even an official word on that as well. It does seem like with the way that things are moving very quickly that this plan of the 3 expansions in a row, War Within, Midnight, and Last Titan all being part of one big story that they have said, very deliberately said that it was going to be done before 2020 or 2030. It does seem like things are moving real quick. So I actually kind of think that they might be on track to pull that off, and not in the sense of like, okay, it's December 31st, 2029, time to release World of Warcraft The Last Titan, but more like the next expansion would be releasing in 2029 or maybe 2030. So it seems like things are moving pretty quickly. All right, I am having to re-record this little bit here about raid testing because in the previous iteration of this, the stuff that they announced, I don't know, a couple hours ago, their initial plan was to raid test the first 7 bosses of the 8 boss raid, basically over the span of 2 weeks. So this week, the initial plan was to do 7 bosses, 4 in one day and 3 in another on Heroic. And then 2 weeks from now, do the same except on Mythic, 4 on one day and 3 on another. There was a lot of feedback that said, hey, this is too much. This is pretty fast. You're testing an absolutely insane amount of bosses in a very short span of time, and so they have expanded it ever so slightly so that we will be testing 2 days of testing this week of heroic testing, and that'll be 5 bosses between those 2 days. And then in 2 weeks, you'll note 2 weeks, not 1, there will be 2 more heroic bosses to test, and then that'll complete the 7 bosses of heroic testing. And then on that Friday, 3 bosses of Mythic to test, and then normal to test that whole weekend, which is very normal. And then 2 weeks after that, again, don't know why there's 2 week splits in between, but such as it is, finish up the 4 remaining Mythic bosses, and then weirdly, one of those will be on Wednesday. Wednesday testing, I can't remember that ever happening before. Sure it has, just can't remember it. But a Wednesday and a Thursday will be the Mythic test, and then Friday will be the 2 wings of Raid Finder. And this is also indicating, apparently, this will only be a 2 Raid Finder wing raid with half of the raid in the first wing and half of the raid in the second. And I guess not, or maybe it'll be a 3 raid. Yeah, it looks like it'll be a 3 wing raid with the final boss being her own separate wing entirely, which obviously they're not going to test. So there it is. That's the raid. All right, now let's take a look at the tier set bonuses. And first, we'll start with their little philosophy here right at the top. We're aiming for relatively simple bonuses for these class sets to let hero talents breathe as the primary focus for the War Within Season 1. They did this with Dragonflight with the talent redesign, and to give honest feedback, the talent redesign in Dragonflight was significantly larger and more impactful than the hero talents are going to be in the War Within. There are some interesting and gameplay changing hero talent trees. That is true. For the most part, they are not. They are mostly passive. They tweak talent setups a little bit, but they don't have a huge impact on moment-to-moment gameplay or completely alter your rotation. So I think this is conservative for no reason. Similar to the first season of Dragonflight, there are significant changes coming to classes. I question that, and we would like to establish a baseline we can build upon throughout the War Within. Now, there are some classes that are being significantly changed. Brewmaster Monk, Blood DK, absolutely. But Vengeance Demon Hunter, Bear Druid, no and no. Prot Warrior, and Prot Paladin, also So I would say I feel more in the camp of no, this isn't true, and these tier set bonuses should probably be a little bit more complex and a little bit more meaty, but it is what it is. They make the game, I just play it. So that's kind of where we're at. It's very important for us to feel that these class sets do not influence hero talent tree selection in meaningful ways. I do think that is true. I do think they've done a pretty good job of hedging their bets across hero talents so far. There's not really anything that I've seen that makes me go like, this really bricks a hero talent tree, or this really makes me go for another one, with maybe like one notable exception for Brewmaster Monk. Right, so basically they're avoiding heavy cooldown reduction, huge amounts of resource generation, or talent selection, particularly in the final gate. Basically, this is a nice way of saying these are all going to be like versatility bonuses. They're going to be plus damage, minus damage reduction. And now let's actually take a look at them, and oh my god, wouldn't you know it, Blood DK's first tier set bonus is 2% damage reduction with a very short buff. When you lose a Bone Shield charge, you have a chance to reduce the damage you take by 1% up to 3%, and then that only lasts for 6 seconds. So, given that you can only lose one Bone Shield charge from auto attacks every couple of seconds, the odds of this, if the chance isn't 100%, the odds of actually rolling this for a while and being at 3% from this, and then of course the 2% from, just having Bone Shield charges at all, actually getting 5% damage reduction out of this doesn't seem very likely. If the chance is 100%, if it's changed to just losing a Bone Shield charge reduces the damage you take by 1% up to 3, it's still going to be kind of tight. 6 seconds is a really short time for this particular kind of buff, and I think it's something that for basically all of these tank tier set bonuses, they probably need to have durations that are kind of skewed a lot longer. Like if this were 15 seconds, I think this tier set would be fine. You would basically get 5% out of a 2-piece, 5% damage reduction. 5% is kind of my minimum for being able to notice that anything's happening with a bonus. And as it currently stands, I think this feels like it's more likely to be about a 3% damage reduction bonus. So Blood DK is thus far kind of disappointed by this, and I don't blame him. Now, they're also disappointed by the 4-piece bonus, and I have some qualms with that. Your damage is increased by 1% per active Bone Shield charge. You're going to have anywhere from 5 to 12 Bone Shield charges active at all times. Taking damage while below 6 will have a chance to give you 1 to 2 Bone Shield charges. It will make it so you don't have to hit Marrow Rend as often, which is good for continuing your standard damage output as a Blood DK. That's great. However, there is a bug with this tier set. If we just spec down into the tree a little bit here, this is not an indication of how you should spec. I'm just trying to get down to Reinforced Bones. Okay, Reinforced Bones makes it so that your Bone Shield can stack up to 2 extra times, so you can get up to 12 instead of 10 stacks, and it does seem like that's a talent you're going to want to take all the time. It's not interacting with the 4-piece so far. I think that's a bug. The idea of getting up to 12% more damage potentially all the time, anywhere from 6 to 12, so let's say 9% more damage all the time, that's a pretty good 4-piece bonus when it's not situational at all. It's not like 4-piece, the 4-piece is like 10% more damage during Dancing Rune Weapon. It's just up all the time. I think that's pretty nice. Also getting this extra, the chance, that's something they'll have to dial in. Maybe there's an internal cooldown on it or whatever, but notably it says taking damage while below 6 Bone Shield charges has a chance to generate some Bone Shield charges. Now, obviously, if you're at 5 or below, you're going to Marrow Rend back up anyway, so you're probably not going to be in this window for very long, so the chance would need to be pretty high. And since you have this damage increase from having active Bone Shield charges, you're probably not going to want to sit below 6 Bone Shield charges anyway, so maybe there should this component right here, the below 6 Bone Shield charges, maybe that should just be removed entirely. Just taking damage has a chance to generate Bone Shield charges, I think would make that component a lot more appealing. Because sitting below, 5 or below Bone Shield charges, not a place you ever really want to be for any length of time at all. And it also kind of counteracts itself. It's sort of a self-defeating tier set bonus. With that being said, average of 8-9% more damage just all the time is actually a pretty decent bonus. Boring, incredibly boring. It is basically 10% versatility. But on the other hand, that's really not so bad compared to some of the other tier set bonuses that are available. Now let's look at the Vengeance 2-piece bonus, and this one actually gives some damage right off the bat, which is nice. It's nice to get damage from your 2-piece and your 4-piece, as opposed to only getting it from the 4-piece, feeling like you're basically getting nothing out of the 2-piece. So you get 15% increased Soul Cleave damage. In single target, in raid situations, Soul Cleave is your main source of damage. You are hitting it fairly often. If we're going off of like current Season 4 numbers, you're hitting it somewhere in the range of like 20 to 25 times per minute, so about every 2.5 to 3 seconds, which is pretty frequently. And that means you would be generating an extra soul fragment something like every 7 to 9 seconds, something like that, if we're estimating at those numbers. Now, gear values, stat values, haste, etc. are going to all go down at the start of a new expansion. You know, you go from having insane end of expansion gear down to kind of garbage gear. Of course, the frequency with which you're going to be hitting Soul Cleave is going to go down somewhat, but that's still a pretty meaningful damage increase out of the 2-piece. Not bad. For Mythic Plus, for AoE damage, lot less valuable. So they really have kind of clearly keyed in on a talent here that is aimed at increasing raid damage for Vengeance and much less valuable in Mythic Plus and in AoE. The 4-piece makes it so that consuming a soul fragment increases the damage and healing of your next Fel Dev by up to 30%. Now, if we look at the Vengeance Demon Hunter tree here, specifically the Fel Scarred one, most of the time your Fel Dev is going to be like a 35-40 second cooldown, something around that range, and you're consuming enough soul fragments that you're going to consume more than 15 soul fragments in the span of 30 seconds, so you're always going to be at 30%. You're going to be well over the cap, right? That's normal. But if you are a Fel-Scarred Demon Hunter and you have this talent right here, Violent Transformation, when you activate Metamorphosis, the cooldowns of your Sigil of Flame and Fel Devastation are immediately reset. Now, there was a very fun bug early on in testing. I haven't gone back and checked to make sure they fixed it, but I assume so. But previously, if you had Demonic, you press Fel Devastation, you go into Demon form for 5 seconds. So what was happening was I would press Fel Dev, it would shift me into Demon form, this talent would trigger, it would reset the cooldown of Fel Dev. If I hit it again immediately, I wouldn't go back into Demon form because I was still in it, and so it wouldn't go back on cooldown, or yeah, it would go on cooldown, it wouldn't immediately reset. So you had to wait for it to actually come off a cooldown, so a couple of GCDs, then you would hit Fel Dev again, it would immediately reset the cooldown. You could basically bounce in and out of Demon form. You could have like 85% uptime on Demon form. Every 6 seconds, you would cast a Fel Dev and you would go back into Demon form. And that just kind of worked permanently. And obviously, that shouldn't be how it is. And so basically the only Fel Devs that you're ever going to have that aren't going to be fully buffed would be ones that you get by hitting Metamorphosis and resetting the cooldown of Fel Dev if you are playing Fel Scarred. But if you're not playing Fel Scarred or you don't hit meta, assuming that this talent is fixed, that's basically 30% more Fel Dev damage, which is decent. It's okay. Ultimately, I don't really think that these two bonuses are all that significant for Mythic Plus. They'll increase your burst AoE damage a little bit, but Vengeance already has so much of that. And, you know, they still haven't gotten any sort of spec rework, so I'm really like kind of tentative on evaluating either of these bonuses, given that I feel like some sort of rework is still coming down the pipeline for Vengeance that might have an impact on either of these, but I don't think it's really going to move the needle for them suddenly becoming a great tank in raids. All right, now Guardian Druid is a pretty boring one. Thrash and Moonfire increase your damage done and reduce your damage taken by 1% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. This is really simple, right? You just basically get 3% damage reduction in damage output. Nothing more to be said about that. The 4-piece bonus is a little more interesting. Arcane damage is increased by 5%. Bleed damage is increased by 8%. So if we look at the Druid tree here, there's sort of a bit of value for both the Elun's Chosen with the arcane damage increase, and for Druid of the Claw Druid with the bleed damage increase. The problem here is that this doesn't really feed into damage reduction for either spec. Again, I'm just going to kind of take whatever talents to get down the tree, just to look at the two main talents that I think this will have some impact on, which are Elun's Favored here, and then Ursoc's Fury. So Ursoc's Fury is fueled, you know, it is a shield, and it is fueled by Thrash and Maul damage. So Thrash damage, it has 2 components. It has an upfront hit, and then it has the bleed damage. So the increased bleed damage, the 8% more bleed damage, can kind of fuel into that a little bit. But we're talking about 8% more bleed damage, and then bleed damage is one relatively small component of the shield that you get out of Ursoc's Fury, which is only 45% of the damage dealt. So we're talking about like maybe 1 or 2% more shielding total out of this 4-piece. I think you're going to get more defensive value out of the damage reduction from the 2-piece than you will out of the 4-piece. Then over here you have Elun's Favored. 40% of all arcane damage dealt will heal you while you're in bear form. Cool. I think that is, also not a huge healing increase. Ultimately, probably going to be 1% more healing out of the arcane damage increase. Now, what this does do is it does make Druid of the Claw Druid just a little bit more appealing to me, not by much, but a little bit by being able to use Wild Power Surge, shift into cat form, and throw that double damage rip into enemies, and then also have that damage, that bleed damage increased by 8%, being able to rake as well, get 8% more damage out of that. I don't really think they've nailed it on Druid of the Claw Druid still, so I still think Elude's Chosen is the better of the two hero specs, but kind of are hitting that intended goalpost of making stuff that's appealing for all of the hero specs available to each class. I do think that this doesn't really skew either way. Maybe. All right, now let's look at Monk. And Monk is a bit of an interesting one because on the one hand, I think it's probably one of the stronger ones, but I also think it's maybe one of the worst ones at the same time. So let's kind of start with the two-piece bonus. Blackout Kick and Keg Smash do 20% more damage, and Shuffle gives you 3% damage reduction. So right off the bat, your top two spells do a lot more damage. This is really good for Monk. This is a substantial step up from Demon Hunter, where it's a situational small damage increase. This is just a straight buff to Brewmaster Monk. The two most valuable skills for the spec got a huge damage increase. This is good for single target with the Blackout Kick. It's good for cleave with the Blackout Kick. It's good for cleave with Keg Smash, and just straight full AoE with Keg Smash. Shuffle granting 3% damage reduction, pretty boring. Not going to say no to it, though. It's not bad to get more damage reduction at 3% is a pretty small amount, but again, I'll take it. It's free damage reduction that comes along with a lot of damage. That is good. The 4-piece makes it so that Blackout Kick increases your damage dealt by 1% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3 times, and has a chance to reset the cooldown of Keg Smash and make its next cast cost no energy. And this is where we run into a problem. If we look at the Brewmaster Shadowpan hero talent tree, we have not one but two effects that are based on spending energy. In the first tooltip here, for each 400 energy you spend, you unleash all your flurry charges, which are the main mechanic of the spec, doing a ton of physical damage for each charge. In the second talent here, for every 50 energy you spend, you reduce the cooldown of Weapons of Order by 1 second. Both of these are pretty significant translations of spending energy into gaining more damage, more defensive value thanks to talents like Wisdom of the Wall, spending those flurry charges by doing damage into just straight defensive bonuses and offensive bonuses as well. So you get a lot of value out of spending your energy. By having this proc that makes your Keg Smash have no energy cost, it actually interferes with the core component of this hero spec to the point that people are talking about right now writing macros that have cancel aura of the name of this buff that makes your Keg Smash free into that macro. That's not great. I also think 3% more damage total coming from hitting Blackout Kick, especially it's something that you have to ramp up over not very long, 8 seconds of a pull, 7-8 seconds of a pull, but still having to ramp that up over a little bit of time is whatever compared to Blackout Kick and Keg Smash just doing 20% more damage. I like this 2-piece a lot. I hope they don't nerf it. I figure they probably will. But the 4-piece, the damage bonus is a little lackluster. It's 3% more damage. That is not significantly better than a couple of versatility gems. And then the cooldown resets on Keg Smash are something they've played around with for a long time, all the way since Legion. It's okay. It does mess with your energy a little bit, and the idea of making it cost no energy to compensate for that is really smart. But then that has some weird potential interactions with things like Storm South's Last Keg. If you already have a charge sitting, you don't want to waste Keg Smash charges. But then you have to balance that out with Blackout Combo, where your Blackout Combo Tiger Palming or Blackout Kick combo Breath of Firing potentially, and depending on how your talents are set up and what actually kind of rises to the top, Blackout Combo Keg Smash just might not be all that great. So, hitting Blackout Kick, having Blackout Combo, and then immediately having a free Keg Smash that you need to use now is not necessarily as appealing as it might sound. And then also the fact that the no energy cost is directly interfering with flurry strikes and efficient training is just a real problem. Like, that just needs to be fixed. It needs to count as though it spends energy for both of those two talents for Shadow Pan. It's not like they're not in choice nodes. You can't opt out of either of these. These are mandatory. So this does actually kind of brick this tier set for one of the hero specs, and I think the way that people are going to get around it is just literally macroing Cancel Aura into this buff, which that's a problem. I think you might be better served by just running better itemized stuff for the other two pieces of gear, that's not good. So that'll need to be fixed. But other than that, you know, if it is fixed, amazing tier set. I think it's probably the best of all of the 6 tanks. If not, you know, it's going to be behind Blood Decay, I think, for sure. With that being said, I still think the 2-piece is great. Just top to bottom good, 2-piece, 4-piece, it's 3% more damage, it's okay. All right, now let's look at Paladin. Paladin's 2-piece makes it so that Shield of the Righteous does 10% more damage. It's not a huge amount of damage, it's not a huge source of your damage, but it's still something, and it also grants 3% damage reduction. Again, that kind of has been their baseline number for most of these talent specs, just 3% more damage reduction, 3% more total damage, kind of is what they seem to be shooting for the 2-piece. That's about what this is. Shield of the Righteous in AoE, you know, that's maybe 3% more damage, a little bit less than single target, and then 3% damage reduction. Pretty boring. The 4-piece is maybe more interesting. Casting a Holy Power ability increases the damage and healing you do during your next Avenging Wrath by 0.5%. This affects stacks. Now, there's a lot of bugs with this tier set so far. I think the damage reduction wasn't working yet. Also, this is off by an order of magnitude, so using a Holy Power ability was increasing the damage and healing you deal during your next Avenging Wrath by 5%, so 10 stacks would be 500% more damage. Obviously, that's a concern. It also, I think, wasn't working with Shield of the Righteous, so like you were just sitting there and Word of Glorying yourself so that the next time you pop wings, you can just do, like, you know, boss killing damage with a single judgment. Once all of that is fixed, and once Shield of the Righteous works with all of this, you know, it does incentivize using both Shield of the Righteous and Word of Glory as much as you can afford to. So consuming those Word of Glories as soon as they're available once they're free, not wasting any of them. All right, so I have my calculator here. So haste values are going to go down. I think realistically, you're going to be casting Shield of the Righteous about every 4 seconds, every 3 to 4 seconds. Let's be maybe a little aggressive and estimate around 3.5. So 3.5 second average frequency on your Shield of the Righteous cast. So if the cooldown on your wings is going to be around 75 seconds, 75 divided by 3.5, that's like 21 casts. There's going to be a couple of Words of Glory in there as well. You know, if you're casting a Word of Glory literally every single time it comes up, I think you're going to have mana issues potentially. But even if you add in like 5 more Word of Glory casts, just to kind of be aggressive with it, if you're getting like 25, 26 Holy Power spenders in for every wing set, that's going to be like 20 to 25 stacks of this buff, I think is realistically achievable. So if we're saying like 24 stacks times 0.5, that's like 12% more damage during your wings. Maybe that number will be a little higher. Maybe it'll be like 15% more damage during your wings if you have Bloodlust or something going like that. I still think that's really not a huge damage increase. You know, it is at your most bursty point. To get somewhere in the range of like 10 to 15% more damage during wings is not a bad thing, but it's not exactly an enormous damage bonus either. It's also not up the entire time. You know, you're not getting 100% uptime on this potentially 10 to 15% damage increase. So, you know, I think it's just okay. And then finally we have Warrior. Warrior's 2-piece makes it so that when Shield Slam cooldown is reset by Strategist. Now, Strategist, I could not remember that name. Obviously I knew what they were talking about, but Strategist, that name eluded me. But it is the Shield Slam reset talent, you know, so it's 20% with Devastator instead of 30% without. That's fine. But when your Shield Slam cooldown is reset by Devastator or, you know, Thunderclap, Revenge, Execute, you gain Expert Strategist, increasing the damage of Shield Slam by 5% and reducing all damage taken by 3% for 6 seconds. So this is notably when the Shield Slam cooldown is reset, not when it's reset and then you hit Shield Slam. And I do think that's, that's nice. You have 6 seconds to hit Shield Slam in that window to have it be buffed. And then also, you're getting that damage reduction. So you're going to be hitting Shield Slam pretty much as soon as it comes up most of the time anyway. There are some times in AoE where you're going to want to hit that Thunderclap or Revenge instead of Shield Slam, but you're hitting Shield Slam pretty frequently all the time. That's the whole Prot Warrior thing, right? So, this isn't like a huge damage increase. It is clearly very single target damage oriented, being only a small damage increase to Shield Slam, and not really up all the time either. Like, I do think this bonus, once again, should probably be more in the like 10 to 12 second range instead of 6 seconds, but it is what it is. The 4-piece bonus makes it so that Shield Slam crits increase the damage of Thunderclap and Revenge by 10%, again for 8 seconds. So this is a very short tier set bonus. I think the issue with this really is like, if this were like 15 seconds or something, you're critting with Shield Slam often enough, I think that you could just maintain 100% uptime on that. And then 10% Thunderclap and Revenge damage. Is that really that great? It's okay in AoE, not that great in single target. But with having limited uptime, probably more in the range of like 50% uptime on that, I really don't think it's going to be that impactful for Raid. For Mythic Plus, maybe it's okay, but then the 2-piece is very oriented toward Raid. I don't really like this tier set bonus because it is kind of all over the place. It's not really all that impactful. It doesn't really seem like it's going to have very good uptime on either of the 2 halves of this set of bonuses. And there's just a complete disconnect between both of them. So not a huge fan of the Prot Warrior tier set bonuses. I have been really enjoying Prot Warrior thus far in the beta. And this is kind of a bummer of a tier set. I thought there was a potential for them to really be a tank on the rise. I do not feel as strongly that way after seeing what they've come forward with for the tier sets so far. I really do feel like Blood DK and Brewmaster Monk are very clearly separating themselves from the rest of the pack when it comes to Raid, and honestly kind of for Mythic Plus too. I think Vengeance could be, what a shock, looking pretty good going into Mythic Plus. But none of these tier set bonuses are really all that game changing, which is as intended. With that being said, I do still think that the hero specs are pretty interesting for some of the classes. Warrior in particular really stands out as one that I do like the hero specs for. So even though the tier set bonuses are I do still think that the tanks and the classes in the upcoming expansion are pretty fun and exciting. All right, I think that pretty much covers it. Thanks for watching. Bye.